Hello, insane children and people of YouTube. This is yet another Alice Asylum crowd design session. This is session number 13, which happens to be the day of my birth and my lucky number. So I'm hoping that we're going to have a fun session today. These crowd design sessions are hosted weekly on our Discord server. You can gain access to our Discord server by becoming a patron. Links to our Patreon are in the description below. Today, we will be talking about two main subjects. One of those is a series of storyboards that were created by our artist Joey, outlining the opening sort of sequence of Alice Asylum. The other is the concept, the idea of Shadow Alice, who she is, what she represents, and what she means to us, the player in the game and in the story of Alice Asylum. For those of our insane children who are with us on Discord, do keep in mind that if you have a microphone and you have something to say, you can use the microphone emoji to indicate that is the case, and you can jump in. We do encourage our insane children to please join the conversation. We do want to hear your voice. A lot of interesting ideas always come from your participation. So I think that with that, I will ask if our mods who are in the chat have anything they want to add.
Just welcome to everyone. Nice to have you here. Let's all join in and have a good chat.
I guess from my
Exactly.
part, nice to see you everyone. And also, Discord made an update, so for this video, there's not going to be any chat head bubbles on the left side, but everything else is working just fine, so just a little heads up.
It's not my birthday, by the way. The 13th. It's the December 13th, so yeah. Not too late. You already gave me the birthday wishes and the cake. I've already eaten the cake. All right. So let's jump into the storyboards. I'm not sure if those are going to be posted here in the chat or if they've been put up on the wiki or both.
They are on the wiki, and I posted them in the chat.
So. Okay. So looking at the wiki, where would we find those?
Where did you put them? Oh, there we go. There's a link.
Okay, so could we say that link somewhat out loud for people who are watching on YouTube?
It would be under americanmake.com/Asylum Wiki /index.php !title equals storyboard. Yes, it's going to be easier that I put a link on the index page.
Right, we'll try to put the link in the description below as well. So if you're looking at that page, the first image up there, it's called Scene 1, Frame 1, and what we're seeing is snow falling upon the little house. And then Scene 2, we actually see the girls. This is going to be Alice and her sister in the front yard of the house, and they are building a snowman. Now, I think one of the things that needs to be said about what we're trying to accomplish here is that in the previous two Alice games, we were aware of Alice's family before the fire. We knew of their home. We actually saw some of the interior, the exterior. We saw some of the fire, and we also saw pictures of the family, but we never really had a chance to interact with or live inside of this space. And so one of the things that we want to do is to spend some time to really introduce the characters who are Alice's family and set a tone, set a mood for the life that she had prior to the prior fire. And yeah. So that is the setup that we get here. Now, there's another thing that's happening. There's a motif that I think I'd like to establish. That is the snowfall, and that the snow later on will transform into the ashes that are they play a large part, obviously, in the fire, but then they also play a large part in chaos itself. And I think that the snowing, cold, icy, this motif also will carry over into chaos. That is Alice's confrontation with chaos and how we see that rendered in Wonderland. So yeah, that's the opening, and that's why we are where we are. And if you skip forward to scene 2 and 3, we see the girls are called inside by mom, and they abandon their work on the snowman, and that allows us to then go into the house where we find fires are burning, and it's a warm, happy family scene. Nan is there, so you would have seen her in Alice Madness Returns, and then of course Alice with her mom and dad. If we skip forward to scene 4, this eventually transitions to back to the outdoors, and we see that one of the snowflakes lands on the snowman's arm and sets him on fire. And by scene 5, he's transformed into a melty face Indiana Jones Nazi looking upon the might of God, death and destruction. And that then goes to scene 6, where Alice wakes up from an awful dream, and that all transitions to. So I think we're going to probably do a bit of the sequence of Alice, the first Alice game. We're going to see her jump through her window, land in the snow, and then she's transported to the asylum. And the asylum sequence eventually transforms into her landing in Wonderland, which the scene she'll land in initially is rendered here as a very beautiful sort of the denial scene. So that is the opening sequence. I think we can open it up to a few comments. I have a bit more to say about this, but maybe we'll let there be a few comments from our insane children before I add any more. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I have a question from any of the opening scenes of the other games. Was it snowing at the time of the incident?
Yes, it absolutely was. In fact, if you...
It was, right.
Yeah, if you take a look at the opening cinematic to the first Alice game, which was done by a company called Little Beast and directed by a guy named Zane Rutledge, which was, funny enough, also the asylum she ends up in. Zane and his team rendered this scene of the cat knocking over the lamp, which sets the fire. And when the fire has set the house afire, then Alice jumps out a window, and I've dumped it here, but this is the frame that shows Alice in the snow outside her home with the White Rabbit toy on the ground next to her.
All right, there you go. Excellent stuff.
And someone has pointed out correctly, that in the next game, Luca says, in the next game, we kind of removed the fact that it was the cat. And that is correct. And I think, that was definitely a bit of story rewriting. I mean, by the time we did Madness Returns, we hadn't really thought out the full kind of Bumby, and someone else had set the fire. But there was enough of, a reason for us to suggest that Alice's memories had been messed with, had been corrupted, or she was misremembering. That'd be a function of denial, for instance, that she might have thought or misremembered that it was the cat that was the cause of the fire.
Okay. Good way of potential retcon.
There you go.
See, I didn't see it as a retcon. I saw it more as she was misremembered because of Bumby and everything else. So it's not like a cop-out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people took those original scenes as gospel for them to find out that it was just a misremembering. I think people will accept that, but maybe some people will get a little annoyed by that, perhaps.
It's a bit late for us to worry about if people are going to be annoyed by that. Because done. That concept of the cat, has already been undone. So,
yeah.
Now, if we want to try to, I don't know, build a reason for why the cat replaced the sort of inkling of knowledge that it was Bumby, we have talked about having Bumby be the shopkeeper in Asylum in Wonderland. Perhaps that cat is in his shop, and we might just leave it at that. It could just be enough to suggest that, why is the cat in Bumby's shop? Well, we'll leave it to you to decide, but hint, hint, right?
Jim of the Mountain also says Alice is an unreliable narrator. Who would have thought
Yes.
Traumatized Little Girl would be like that?
Yes, that's correct.
So one thing I did want to bring up, though, that some people have said in the past about an opening and having it as a tutorial, which is really good, is people wanted to know if it was skippable. Because you've played the game enough, maybe I know what I'm doing, would I'd rather just get away, or just say, no, I'm good, okay, get me into the actual...
Is the cinematic that we're talking about right now skippable?
Not the cinematic, when you have control of the character. And seeing...
Oh, I see. Well, okay, so that was a part of what I wanted to discuss here, and that is, I don't know that what we're looking at here is actually the opening cinematic. As I wrote on the post over on Patreon, which is related to this discussion, to this cinematic being talked about, what I said there was that perhaps the first thing we see when we've put the disc into the PlayStation or the Xbox, and the PC, it's going to be on PC too. Don't freak out. So wherever we've put the disc, and it's a digital download too. Jesus Christ! It's however you play the game on whatever you play it on, except not on phone and not with loot boxes.
They're surprise mechanics, okay?
Oh God. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So it's so difficult talking about the game we want to make sometimes. Okay, so wherever you play the game, the first thing you're going to see obviously logos fade to black, and then we're going to come up on the snowfall. And I believe that one of the first things we might see is us transitioning straight into the house, and we're given control, and we're able to move around the house in a very limited fashion, poke around. Obviously, there's no battling, there's no fighting going on there, but think about the way that the most recent God of War started off in a very calm place, and he was dragging a log back to make something, and so there was a lot of kind of, ooh, who am I? Why am I here? What's going on? I'd like us to recreate something along those lines. And so to answer that question, I'd ask another question. Could you skip that? Could you skip the opening of that crouton adventure?
I don't think so.
Nope.
Yeah, I don't think so. So I don't think you'd be
I
able
don't
to.
think you should be allowed to.
No, I mean it is the game, right? It is gameplay.
Yeah.
And as I wrote in
on a second playthrough.
See, that's what I was thinking, is it's one thing for one playthrough, but I go back to Dishonored all the time, because I think they had a really good both 1 and 2 intro mechanic, where you had a chance to learn the chapters or learn how the player reacts, but you could skip it if you wanted to. And so I'm not saying that the first time you should have that option, but, as a New Game Plus, where it's like, okay, yep, I know, I'm going to jump through this window, be done.
Yeah, I don't know. This is a sticky question. I honestly haven't thought about this, right? So my personal reaction would be, look, it's 5 or 10 minutes is what I've written over on Patreon. It's 5 or 10 minutes of this sort of pre-fire interacting with her family, out of a 8, 10, 12-hour gameplay experience. Can people not stand 5 minutes, 10 minutes of intro play?
I don't
guess
know
that-
that many games offer for you to skip the introduction.
No.
I don't think that's a common occurrence.
I remember something. I can't remember what it was. I played recently, and there was an option at the beginning of the game. It was something like, "Yeah, I know what I'm doing. Let's go," and you could skip the tutorial part. I can't for the life of me remember what it was.
But we're not talking about a tutorial here. We're talking about a meaningful, emotional narrative relation to the who of Alice's family and her life prior to the fire.
And that's, I think, the big difference, yeah, is having it where it ties into the narrative compared to just, here's how the game plays.
But on a new game plus,
Yeah.
you
It's-
already know the story.
It,
Well,
it,
I'm
it
just saying
reminds me
some
like The
people
Last
are
of Us.
impatient.
Like, you know, in The Last of
Uh.
Us, the opening part, you can't skip that. You have control of his daughter, and you kind of go through the whole little life part of that whole
Right.
scene, and then you get into the gameplay right away afterwards.
Yeah. So I don't know that this is going to end up sort of shifting, people's perception of the value of the game. It's that it's going to destroy our ranking in terms of reviews. That we don't allow someone to skip a 10-minute section. I don't know. This seems like an interesting sort of sidetrack. It's one that I'd rather just set aside for right now. But there seem to be some that are trying to put a lot of importance on it. So I
I mean, it's a story-based game. I don't see why you'd want to skip part of the story.
Right?
Because it's not really a tutorial so much as an introduction.
that's correct.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It should be. I think we're kind of putting cart up before the horse here with the new game plus concept,
Right.
where, again, if someone knows what they're doing, it shouldn't be on like a you have to spend 5 minutes here. It's go to point A, go to point B. If you know what you're doing, you can probably get through that a lot faster.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've got Connor Carbon and in the chat. They're talking about this as a tutorial area. You've got a few rooms of the house. So Connor's saying, perhaps some of this could be walked past. You wouldn't be necessarily forced to interact with every room of the house. Therefore, there could be a shorter path to the exit, right? And Octochicken is saying, this could be a few days of playing Alice in the house. I'd say that if that were the case, I'd prefer that we did it in some sort of like stylized, sunrise, sunset, very fast forwarded type of sequence. But I could imagine something like that working. And, so that's maybe a 15-minute sequence, but we actually get to see a couple days in the life of. And there's a few people saying they think that's kind of interesting. Again, I don't think this is purely tutorial. I mean, this is really, for me, this is about storytelling. And I'm a little concerned that we would have something as critical as this opening sequence. If we suggest that it could be skipped, then it also suggests that the story we're telling is not worth hearing. Okay, so let's maybe put a pin in that whole skipping this thing and come back, because I think that's a little bit off track. Instead, I think the question right now is, do we generally agree on this 10, 15-minute pre-play sequence followed by the cinematic, which then leads into the fire, leads into her transition to Wonderland? That's I think that's the topic I'd like to get back to.
Yeah. I really like it. I think also how you wrote that it'd be like 5-10 minutes. I think that's just like general. Like if you were just to like wander through the house, like in that set path, it would take that long. But because you have free control, you could essentially make that 5-10 minutes longer. Because I know there's a lot of people that like to just explore every little nook and cranny. And then like once you get to that last point, like you said, from point A to point B, once you get to that point, the story just goes on to the cinematic.
I mean, just like Menace Returns, I just started replaying it. You can spend an hour just walking around the opening, seeing every little thing and trying
Just like
to
that.
digest things. So
Yeah.
It's player choice with that.
Yeah, I think that is also the design intention to an area like this is, why build it if we're not going to pack it with the kind of details that give people a reason to kind of stick around and explore and poke their nose into stuff. Certainly for me, that's what I'd like to see for that area inside of her house.
Mm-hmm.
Throw in a couple Easter eggs.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Octochicken wrote
achievement.
Octochicken wrote, loaded up with details worth investigating, hints of where things in Wonderland came from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. And maybe there is an opportunity here for a little kind flashes of something being wrong. Is this her real life? Is this a sort of recollection? Is it a bit of a dream? Perhaps, this is all being recalled, but she's actually already gone through the traumatic event. So I think there's a bit of a chance here also for it's more maybe a bit more than just a normal life day in the life of Alice and her family. It's the sort of echo of a day in the life or something like that.
I like that. I think having just a mildly this seems off also
Mm,
sets the vibe forward. So, it looks great, but maybe why is that face a little twisted, or why is what?
yep,
And then just kind of like a Silent Hill PT kind of where it's just unnerving, not, in your face.
yep, that's right. Okay. So it sounds like we have an understanding then. A playable section at the beginning, filled with points of interaction which deliver on the narrative and the setup of her family, the emotional context that deepens the sense of loss. As far as the thematic elements of the snow, the snowman, the fire, I don't know if there's any thoughts or feedback on the other content contained in the storyboard here. Anybody have issues with or thoughts on the melting snowman?
I'm just gonna put it, I just don't like the snowman concept, but
I
that's my
adore
take
it.
on it.
I love it so much. I love games that like they just start off right in the snow sometimes. Just a snowy scene. It's pretty. And
Mm-hmm.
then just to see it all melt away like that, you're like, oh, now it's gonna get good.
Who is it that doesn't like the snowman and why?
Megas.
I just don't like yeah, this is Magus. Don't I just don't like the snowman. I don't know why. I will admit that. I just don't like the snowman. That's my take.
Okay.
You can all hate me for that, and I probably am wrong. So,
My main issue with the snowman is he's a bit. He doesn't later have any sort of point of reference to any other characters. For instance, were it a snow rabbit, would we feel like, oh, hey, right, this is Alice in Wonderland. That's the white rabbit. Where's it going to take us? So that would be my thought. It's a little bit generic. So I don't know how we'd feel. Maybe we can ask our artists to re-render that with some snowy bunny ears, or maybe there's another character from the games that somehow would make more sense. A snow cat. I don't know.
I once built a snow cat. Really good.
I
I
think
like
that's
it.
exactly why I had a problem with it. Was it just didn't feel Alice-y enough to me? It's just like, okay, snowman.
Yeah.
How does that relate? So
Yeah,
no,
I
you're
like
right. If
the-
we can.
Yeah, the idea said like maybe they're building a snowman, but then Alice kind of, stick some ears on it and they have like a girly laugh about it, changed it into a rabbit. That would make it more relevant.
Well, I like Greg Octochicken's suggestion here that actually the point of contention between the sisters, and that is he's written Alice tries to make it into a snow rabbit, at which point Lizzie knocks the ears off and turns it back into sort of a normal snowman, telling her, "Hey, this is how you make an actual snowman." That's interesting. It might go the other way if later on we are going to talk about Lizzie as sort of the manifestation of creativity and chaos, and so Mom would be order. It could be that Lizzie actually is the one who pushes Alice to make it a little crazier. But anyway, I really like this idea of there being a little bit of a struggle or a conflict between the girls over what exactly this snowman is.
Yeah, I think what what was just like a sort of seemingly generic part of an opening cinematic storyboard could actually tie into stuff quite meaningfully.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that would be our goal. Every frame needs to tell a story. So that was partly why I'm asking a question about how we feel about the meaning of the snowman itself. Uh, is there anything in particular when we skip back to scene, I guess it's scene 3, and we've got Nan. Now, I believe that's Nan Sharp was her in-house nanny. Is that right?
This looks more
Okay.
like Pris Witless.
or Pris.
We were
It
kind of having
looks
that.
like Pris.
Yeah,
It looks like Pris Witless, but I believe it's supposed to be Nan Sharp that took care of her. Is that right?
yeah. I think that needs change. But we were having a discussion earlier in the chat here about her not looking like the actual Nan. She looks like Pris. So I don't know if
That's correct.
Joey mixed the two up.
Probably, because I get them mixed up. So
Yeah, it was
let's.
Nan Sharp was her nanny, and in Madness Returns, she was a prostitute.
Okay. Well, she becomes a prostitute, right? I think
Yeah,
she
she
starts
becomes.
off. Right.
Yeah.
I'm hoping she's not one. That might be something Alice stumbles on in one of the rooms, is like a precursor to a brothel. So yeah, I think we need to have this character fixed up. That looks like Pris Witless. It needs to be Nan Sharp, and then we might want to think about there being any particular lines that come
Well,
off of her.
actually, this is interesting. Doing a little bit of research. Now, Pris was Nurse Priscilla, and she was in Rutledge.
Correct.
So having her in the dream might work, but then maybe having it where it's like, wait, you don't look right. Shouldn't you be? And then kind of have a flash between the two, maybe. Something of that nature.
Could be. I worry people will think we just made a mistake though, and that's like our trying to cover our butts for having made the mistake of confusing the two characters. Unless I don't know, unless we've got a good reason.
Well, no, I mean, again, what I mean though is because one character is her nanny basically in the asylum, and the other was her nanny in the house.
Real life, yeah.
But if she gets the two confused and just in a flash you kind of see the two interchange.
Oh, I see.
So
Yeah.
it's like, weren't you, like, you walk through the door, you turn around and it's the other person.
Right. Okay. Well, we can think about that. I'm trying to remember if there's anything in particular we might, or if there's anything particular we might hear from this nanny. I think this is something we can get into as we work on the story, but anything we might hear from her that sort of hints at or foreshadows sort of, she's got a sense that something wicked is on its way. Because she seemed to be one of the few for Madness Returns that actually had Alice's sort of best interests in mind, and who probably also had some premonition or kind of recognition of there being an evil force present in the life of the Littles.
I know in Madness Returns, Nan was often having conversations about Alice's wild imagination.
Yeah.
She kept bringing that up. That could be something that sort of plays into it.
Okay. Well, I think that is a point there. We're going to want to script some dialogue, and that dialogue ought to mean something to, especially to those of us who have followed the story and seen her in the previous game. Okay. Yeah, Greg says perhaps have her be the one that shouts to Alice to take off her shoes. Her boots, don't get yelled at by Mom. Not only does that show that she cares about Alice, but it also shows Mom as the matriarch, the holder of order, the enforcer, which will be important later on in the story as well. Okay, so melting snowman, perhaps we are going to try that as a melting rabbit. And then going on to scene 6 and 7, this is where Alice essentially wakes from the dream, perhaps a dream within a dream. The house is on fire. I think that there are going to have to be a few bits and pieces here that expand where Joey has seen 6, 7, and 8. There might be a few more frames in here to sort of recreate the original cinematic from AMA, so that we revisit that, and then we have Alice come out the window, land in the snow, which of course is can be kind of a frame to frame recreation of that original scene, and yet this time it'll transition to her getting told sweet dream by her father, and then that transitions to sweet dream by a sort of a doctor figure. I think we need to determine who that doctor figure is, and kind of what exactly is happening. This is probably not in Rutledge Asylum yet. This is going to be a doctor at the hospital. I forget the name of. Does
Oh,
anybody
I have
remember
that
the name of the
case
hospital?
book somewhere. I can't remember.
Well, so there is a hospital prior to Rutledge, and I think that having her see a sequence of events in that hospital, overhear some dialogue. This is actually written up on the Asylum Wiki. If you go to, I think it's in the story page called Prelude. So there is a hospital. It says here there's a bit of dialogue we've written for this. So I think that we may find that in cinematic there's going to be pieces from what we previously wrote as the introduction, especially the lines of dialogue here, because they do a lot to set up the world's view of Alice and her situation.
It
Dr.
was
Grantham,
it was Littlemore Infirmary.
there you go. And the doctor that dealt with her there was called Grantham. So yeah, that's going to be what I think she's seeing in the sequence there, where she's waking up strapped down to the bed. And then finally, she falls into Wonderland. Now, for the fall into Wonderland, Joey has it rendered as her falling into a beautiful place. And I think this is going to bring up a question of the sequence, the order. She goes from slumber, which is the stage we see her in her home, to shock, and then to denial. But I think at one point we actually talked about going from slumber into a little bit of denial, and then into shock, and then back into like proper denial.
Can't remember the exact order. We've sort of gone back and forth a little, haven't we? Yeah, for sure. The landing place needs to be visually accurate, let's say.
Well, early on, we had some images drawn up, a place called Denial, and we had said that that was actually one of the first places she could go to from this transition from the fire. It was like she was escaping into Wonderland, and Omegas has pasted that up in the chat here on Discord. And then that sort of falls apart, and she finds herself in shock. I'm thinking now that that's not going to work anymore. She's going to have to go from slumber and the asylum, and she's going to fall straight into the realm that we know as shock. And of course, we've done up quite a few images of that. So there isn't going to be, as Joey has rendered it here, the opportunity to see beautiful Wonderland. She's going to be falling into shock Wonderland. So I think we need to ask Joey to clean up these final frames here to show that properly.
I think that could look really good as well, though. Instead of like falling into like a beautiful Wonderland, or sort of like pleasantness flying by, if it's all sort of like just crazy, nasty stuff as she's tumbling. It would be quite a striking imagery to start the air quotes game.
Yeah, well, if you go to the page on the wiki, it's called Shock, you can actually see some of the imagery that's been done up for that, and it's what Omri has been describing as sort of this cold, white, blue, numb environment. So I've pasted one of those pictures in there, but there's a few more pictures on the wiki page as well.
Yeah, and it correlates to the snow very well, too, because we're dealing with, instead of what people consider a yellow fire or red, we're working with blues and whites for the fire.
Okay, so that's a note to Joey. We'll want the storyboard redone in that section, just to reflect that she goes from the falling out of the hospital into shock. And so those final frames there need to show that instead of, because what she's drawn here looks like kind of like the opening to Madness Returns, which while it's gorgeous and we love it, we shouldn't repeat that, and obviously it doesn't make sense for the opening of this game. Okay. Right, that sort of brings us to the end of these storyboards. Is there anything else that people would like to discuss in terms of the messaging within some of what we're seeing here? Any other subtle hints or narrative elements that we think we might want to mention at this point? So Octo Chicken Greg says, given Shock's visual aesthetic, maybe she falls through glass, looking glass, shattered reflections, the shadow, like glass, falling, snow, ash. Yeah, I think that the glass motif, we can keep that inside the realm of ice and snow. And so we might find that falling through a looking glass, it could be kind of falling through ice. So these can be things I think that we can render out. It looks like a very icy mirror, something like that.
Yeah, having like a frozen lake that she falls through would be pretty cool.
Yep.
With reflections and ray tracing and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, it seems like our chat's pretty quiet around this. And I hope that everybody page and that we're all happy with what's been rendered here in the opening sequence. So we will get Joey to do up a couple of changes for the content of these scenes, and we will also try to get everything we've described in terms of the timeline here written down so that we have a sense of what the opening of the game might look and feel like. And I'm assuming all that's going to go up on the wiki, and then people can go and write notes and comments to that stuff. Is that right?
That's correct.
That is correct.
Cool.
And people can comment on the wiki, so feel free to.
Great.
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Yes, and just a reminder that links to the wiki are in the description below, and you can go to the wiki and you can comment on those things. So, okay, I think what we're going to do now is shift gears to the topic of Shadow Alice, because it seems that some of our insane children have brought up questions with regards to who, what, why is Shadow Alice. So I don't know if there's anyone in the chat that wants to open this up, if there's specific questions that we want to talk about.
I know
I haven't
Greg
seen anyone
had
with
a
any
lot.
microphone icons yet.
Sorry, Taylor.
Chatty.
Taylor, I couldn't hear what
know
you...
Greg had wanted to talk about this subject quite a bit. I think he's in the chat too.
Greg, you want to come on and talk with us?
So for those listening on YouTube, again, Shadow Alice is a major topic on the wiki. I think you click on the wiki, again, the link is in the description below, click on protagonists under the characters section, and then right up near the top is a section for Shadow Alice, which contains artwork and a lot of text and a very lengthy comment from Greg, which I think we're going to probably discuss now. So Greg says, what exactly is she supposed to be? Is she like an openly antagonistic villain? Right. I think that the simple answer to that is no. I do not believe that Shadow Alice is our enemy, though I do think that we, the writers, are going to portray her as an unknown and potentially as an enemy. So it may be one of those things where throughout the course of the game, and via storytelling and also in her representation in art and design, we're going to view her as horrifying, as scary, as awful. But it's going to be the case that at the end of the game, it is Shadow Alice that we need to ally ourselves with in order to finish this particular journey. So we can get to in a moment here what that looks like how do we ally with our shadow self. But as far as she's represented in the game, I do think it would be interesting for us as the game progresses at various stages to see glimpses of her, to see or hear of her or her actions. Of course, that's coming to us via third parties. And I think we are going to want to try to build up the sense that Shadow Alice is trying to thwart us. Everybody's pissed off at us because of Shadow Alice, so forth and so on. And so it won't be until somewhere towards the end of the game that we realize that, hey, Shadow Alice is us. And then in order for us to finish this journey, we have to partner up with her, we have to integrate her, and so forth. So I don't know if that answers that basic question in a way that satisfies for Greg/Octo Chicken.
I like how Seafoam says here that Shadow Alice should be the one that actually pulls Alice out of denial. Like she is the catalyst that progresses the story.
So that could be something we work into the story, which isn't the very end. So that could be kind of our Kaiser Soze moment. You know, for those that don't know, that's The Usual Suspects is a good movie that you should go watch, and it, you know, contains Kevin Spacey playing a character who, you know, spins out a tremendous amount of story and lies, only for you to realize at the very end of the film that he's the bad guy they've been all along. Anyway, this would be something similar where, you know, it turns out that Shadow Alice was the one who helped us to get out of denial. She was the one that made the House of Horrors sitting at the center of denial, which is the exit from that realm. She was the one who made it visible to us. But perhaps at the time we don't realize that she's the one that does that, or she's disguised herself, or whatever. Right? There's 100 different ways we could go with that piece of the story. So yeah, I think that would be nice. Again, back to the Kaiser Soze moment. Is what would be nice is that towards the end of Asylum, we have an epiphany moment where sort of 10 or 15 different moments in the game where, you know, we were either pushed forward into chaos or we were clutched from certain death. We realized that that was chaos or Shadow Alice all along.
Yeah, quite like that. I can even imagine it as you're playing the game, the sort of the stuff you see is so subtle that you barely would notice it. But then, like, the realization flashbacks at the end, I don't know, that would be pretty ace.
Right. You know, the other version of this that you might think about, yeah, it's Lucas Suffers mentions this in the chat. He says this would be our "would you kindly" moment in reference to that line in BioShock. And, you know, you play through the entire game, you don't realize that every time "would you kindly," that's actually your programmatic trigger line. So this would be something along those lines. You know, I want to be careful that we don't say it's going to be exactly like that. Obviously, one of our goals in writing this is to have it come off as feeling original and fresh and specific or relative to the story we're trying to write here.
I think what kind of sets this apart from beyond those stories is we're revealing her to be helpful in the end rather than, oh, this has been my enemy the whole time and I didn't know it.
Well, I think someone here mentions, Magus mentions, you know, Fight Club and Tyler Durden. Would you classify Tyler as helpful or destructive? It depends on the point in the story at which you see his influence on Jack's life. So, you know, to some degree, Jack was stuck in this sort of cookie cutter IKEA lifestyle, and he needed something to shake him up and to wake him up. And so, you know, Tyler is literally the, you know, physical incarnation of Jack's shadow self. It's the opposite It's the sex having, fight starting, building blowing up guy that Jack could never imagine that he himself could be, and yet he's desperate to get out of this boring cardboard box life that he lives in. So our shadow, if it goes too far, can obviously blow up buildings and be quite destructive to ourselves and to others around us. But in the healthy doses where it's managed properly, it can be very healthy.
And the thing is, again, when you go back to the club that fights, because we're not supposed to talk about it, the the thing that makes that movie so good in the book is you read it once and you read it again, it's a different narrative.
Right.
So that's kind of what I'd love to, where you have
Connor,
it, where you play it.
Connor says something here, says, I think setting Shadow Alice up to be arguably both helpful and harmful would be the most ideal. Actually, that kind of makes me think that, one of the things we could do is have a mechanic whereby, going too absolutely mental, becoming too bloodthirsty, being too destructive, starts to edge Alice towards, the shadow's side, and perhaps there's some detrimental effect to that. Although I hate to suggest that because I like murdering things and blowing things up, so I don't know how we would balance that so it didn't become frustrating. And of course, games where you play through to the end and your decisions as to whether or not you killed the little sisters or not somehow impact the end. I mean, a lot of times those are kind of unsatisfying. It's difficult to have those kind of choose your own ending type setups and have them be satisfying to everybody. Greg says, I think that's why playing a Shadow Alice throughout, you would still get the reveal of the Shadow who wasn't antagonistic, but the force that helps us get through the challenges that the child alone couldn't face, but still prone to horrific violence, i.e. slaughtering your way through Wonderland as the one solution. I know Greg mentioned this idea that we play Shadow Alice as the main character throughout Alice Asylum. I mentioned last week I'm concerned about that idea because it really does a lot to tear apart some of the foundation work we've done so far. It requires a real kind of rethinking of almost everything. So just one of the points that I would say in response to that, and I like the idea, it was an idea I started off with from the beginning because it could be, it is a story mechanic. It's a story trope. It's a story setup, but usually that's like a revenge tale. So the person doesn't necessarily redeem themselves through revenge, but oftentimes, tales of revenge tend to end in the hero sort of driving over a cliff and blowing themselves up to kill the villain at the end. This is a tale of a young girl who's ultimately sort of going through trying to define who she is as a character. And if Shadow Alice takes the lead on that, I think it's a lot harder for us to suggest the little girl reintegrating with that and then how that leads to who the character is in AMA and AMR and why this journey back exists in the first place. Because if the integration already took place, then there would be no reason for the return trip. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I picture it in my mind.
One thing I thought we did bring up, though, is actually having it where in the other two games we were playing as Shadow Alice, though, because that is how
correct.
She got through everything. So that's one thing I wanted to touch back on, is if we're playing as her in this game, then it wouldn't work on the other two then.
Well, the separation of the two presumably then would have happened prior to the prior fire, right? It would have happened at the moment of the fire. And then what we'd be saying is that the Alice of Asylum, of AMA and AMR was. And again, I'm not sure. It takes away my sense of reintegration of the child self. notion, and that was something I felt was um, for the journey was really important, because when you've gone through a trauma, a lot of times you end up hardening, you end up fighting your way through it, and what you're left with at the end is this kind of hardened self who, yeah, I fought that, I dealt with that, but one of the harder final steps to take is the reopening up of your self to trust others, to love again, to see the world and people in it as good, and the thing that happened to you as being a single event, not a representation of what you should expect from people and the world for the rest of your life. So this is where I feel like we've seen the blood-covered, knife-wielding Alice chop her way through the first two games that were out there. But I think her final step of the events after Madness Returns, that final step has to be the blossoming, the reopening, the sunlight shining in again, and she's not going to do that unless she goes back and rescues her child self. That's a lot of the thinking I've been. So again, that's when Greg mentions, "Hey, let's play as Chaos Alice." It really undoes that for me. So I know he keeps coming back to this. I guess I don't know if there's a way to write it up. Greg, if there's a way for you to write up your story suggestions so that it, I feel like what you're suggesting here needs to be written up in some way is to start all the way at the beginning and work all the way through the end of the game and answer all these questions. Or I don't know if he wants to take the microphone, if there's any further suggestions or ideas that want to be brought up on that. But I maybe I could just boil this down. I don't know that I can shadow Alice being a transforming character. If she starts at the beginning of Asylum as Shadow and ends as Shadow, what was the Shadow character's journey? If she starts at the beginning of Asylum as a little naive, innocent girl who has to fight her way through to an end where she has learned of her shadow self and she's transformed, and the shadow self goes on to fight the battles, that is her transformation. And the thing that I like about the idea that shadow self goes forward and fights the next two games is there's a symmetry at the end of Madness Returns where she comes back, and shadow self also has to recapture her childhood self. So you have two character transformations happening simultaneously within one character. And that's one of the things that I think is really powerful about this idea. You have the child recognizing the necessity of her shadow self, and you have the adult recognizing the necessity of her child self. That is how you create a whole individual. So that's the story arc that I'd like us to be working towards. And when we talk about a purely Chaos Alice journey, maybe someone could tell me what is Chaos Alice's story arc that is similar to something like that. So Greg has written here, unless she left the child behind in denial, the shadow goes on to fight AMA and AMR's events, and then after killing Bumby, goes like, now that I've finished this journey, I can go back and find my child. Okay, Greg, so what you've written here is absolutely right, but she doesn't leave the child in denial. She leaves the child essentially at the end of Asylum, at the stage at the end of Asylum that is sort of prior. She leaves the child essentially in the slumber that happens at the end of Asylum. And then the Shadow Alice goes on to the restarting of the adventure at the beginning of AMA. But it's in Acceptance where we see Shadow Alice leave Child Alice behind in the world of Asylum. By the way, Asylum is a suggestion of not just an insane asylum, but it is a place of safety. And so there's a double meaning in the fact that child Alice is left in a mental asylum. And I don't mean that as in a crazy person's mental asylum. I mean, she's left inside of a box within her own mind that is a safe place for her to hide out until the battle is won. I don't know if anybody caught that previously, but that's sort of part of the meaning of asylum in this instance. So Octo Chicken says she then becomes whole again, which would allow her to go, allow her to her power to go into Otherlands. I still see a say it work. I'm not sure. I still see a way it works, but let me try writing it out so I don't keep destroying this Discord session with my inane suggestions. That's all right, Greg. We're here for your suggestions. Connor Carbon says, I think Shadow Alice being a flat character will show more of the growth of Alex as a dynamic character, which is kind of what you just said, American. I agree. Okay. Who is Chaos Alice, says Nabi Yang. I think we just oh, right. Chaos Alice is Shadow Alice. Okay, so Greg says, okay, yeah, it's finally clicked in my mind. Been a bit dense and not really gotten it until now. Okay, well, that's good to hear. It could also be that I'm not describing all of this correctly, and that would be 100% on me. Wendy says, as someone who experienced trauma as a child, I sometimes feel like I left behind my child self and have continued through my life as my shadow self. That's why I love this whole idea so much. Well, Wendy, I'm right there with you. That is the reason why we are writing this story, because I too have this same problem. The traumas that I've experienced left me as a very kind of like rigid, analytical, sort of semi-angry person who has yet to kind of fully re-embrace my child self. And it only comes out from time to time. And it's very frustrating that when it does come out, it's very scared, it's very easily upset. And so trying to figure out how to invite it back out and to be friends with it and to allow it to be in the world and be healthy, that's part of the reason why I'm interested in writing this story. So there you go. Does anybody have any other suggestions, questions, psychological?
I wanted to bring one thing up that I think people have talked about is whether or not Shadow Alice is Lizzie.
No.
If we have the time to bury into that.
Well, the reason that's a question, and it's a good question, keep in mind that Alice's mind represents aspects of her personality wearing the masks of people that she knew from the real world. So, you know, the carpenter is a mask that Alice's psyche put upon an aspect of her personality. I can't remember who. What's the Ralph Wiggum?
But it says on top of it.
Yeah, my cat's breath smells like cat food. That's deep. So I think that you know, Lizzie could be a mask that Shadow Alice wears for sure. If that is the case, it's obviously meant to be a distraction. It's meant to be a misdirection from the reality of who Shadow Alice is. And we've also said recently in looking at the design for the Red Chess Queen that perhaps that could wear Lizzie's mask. But Omri pointed out that if the Red Chess Queen is supposed to represent order versus chaos, then it might make sense to have that be a more matriarchal presence. In other words, it could be Alice's mom as representative of her. And again, we go back to Lizzie. She makes sense as an agent of chaos, and I'm not saying that in a Get Smart sense, but she makes sense as an agent of chaos because she represents the stage beyond Alice's current sort of prepubescent part of the human cycle. She represents creativity. She represents flexibility. She represents adventure. She would be to young Alice, you know, a model or an exemplar for someone who's out in the world having adventures.
Connor would like to speak.
Yeah,
Hi.
go for it.
All right.
Is it on already?
Turn your volume up a little bit.
Hello?
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, that should be better. So this is a quick one. I noticed.
No, don't make it too quick because we really enjoy listening.
Right.
Serenade us, yes.
So I noticed we're mentioning chaos a lot, and I love the art that was just posted. So two of my favorite games are AMR and also Psychonauts, and I keep thinking when I guess the imagery in Psychonauts is probably a little more heavy-handed. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of specifically here. Well, when you play Psychonauts, if you're in, say, like the mind of a PTSD suffering war veteran, all the stuff in that level is like tanks and guns and airplanes and stuff. Anyway, so back to this game, when we say chaos a lot, I keep wondering, and I don't know if this is taboo or controversial or if you'd be allowed to, but I always wonder, do you think you would put any like chaos magic, maybe not necessarily real world chaos magic imagery or symbolism, but I guess I thought it'd be so cool to have somewhere in this game chaos magic. I mean, I just said it. Or maybe as an alternative on the more silly side, there's that kind of strange joke religion called Discordianism that worships the goddess of Eris, the goddess of chaos. And I just thought some imagery based on their golden apples or some other type of chaos-based imagery would just be really cool to have involved with maybe Shadow Alice or Chaos Alice, as we sometimes are calling her.
What is chaos magic?
Oh, it's just a branch of real world occultism. Like I'm not talking story stuff right now, but I know that there are. Let's relate this to say like an anime film where it might be based on some very real elements of reality, and like say magic, different branches of magic. So there's Wicca, just traditional paganism. I'm not an expert on the topic, but I know that chaos magic, Magick, is one of them, and it gets pretty deep into entropy mathematics and how that might relate to magic. And I'm sure you're looking it up.
Yeah, well, I'm looking it up, and one of the things developed until the 1970s.
Okay.
So that would be an issue, but it also looks like, again, it is that is grounded somewhat in art, in math, and so remember that our games, and we don't talk about it very often, but the Alice games, they lean very heavily on alchemy, and that is why if you look at the keys that were in the previous game, or the symbols on her dresses, or the symbols they're all over the world, those alchemy symbols are put there not randomly. They're put there with very specific meaning. And if you want to read or understand more about that, you can go check out the Carl Jung books, because he did a book in particular on alchemy and symbology. And so there is a lot that we're going to eventually layer into this. It's one of the things that, like, when we talk about story, I don't actually touch on it very much, but it's constantly going off in the back of my mind about the symbology of the particular phases she goes through, how PTSD links up to alchemy. Because remember, alchemy is a change process. So one of the phrases, like it's actually on the shirt I'm wearing right now. It says "Solve et coagula." It means that you first have to dissolve in order to reform. And so the dissolving would be the encounter with chaos. The reforming would be acceptance. It would be achieving your final state after the process of transformation. You could imagine that a story like the one Alice is in is the crucible in which the elements are placed, and so all these things, that's our magic, alchemy magic. So we will definitely layer all that stuff in there.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I think I always feel that what I love so much about these games is that there's this element of potency, whether it's creepy stuff, kind of pseudo occult stuff, or alchemy, witchy vibes, spooky. It just feels potent. It's the same reason I think a lot of people love Halloween so much more than other holidays. It's just, feels dangerous but enriching in a way. Like you can learn something from it, but you're also kind of, nervous about it. I think that's what makes these games so awesome. Anyways, thanks for that answer.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for the question. Yeah, Arcadia, aka Taylor, has posted up a picture that shows alchemy and how it then links up to various emotions. It links up to the different symbols of the planets. This kind of stuff. I mean, once you try to dig into this on the internet, you'll find 1,000 years of things that you could read on this. But where I'm trying to draw a lot of our foundation for this from, again, is the text, the books by Jung. So if you want to read more about our particular brand of interpretation of alchemy as it links up to a psychological process of transformation, then go read some of the books by Carl Jung on alchemy and psychology. And by the way, I mean, a lot of it's nonsensical, but then our entire reality in lots of is nonsensical. So we just have to pick our silly foundation and stand on it. Doesn't mean that it's right or wrong, but like Connor said, it gives a sense of concreteness to the thing that we're building. Okay, does anybody else have a microphone and want to add any? We have come up on past the hour, so I think we could wrap this session up.
One more quick question. Go for it.
Go for it, Connor.
Okay, I was going to save this because I thought it might be a derailing topic.
Yay.
Well, it is, but now you're
You derailed everything now.
Yeah, I ruined it. So, okay, this is kind of super left field, so I don't expect there to be an answer, but I just wanted to ask, because otherwise I'll probably end up buying a $5 super chat just asking you this question. So I might as well ask now. So when would or does or will white boxing or just like game level prototyping or design considerations begin to take play? Is that something that's like way down the line, or is that something you would have a team of people start thinking of in a game design perspective like way early on? How does that all roll out with how you and everybody else approaches American McGee Alice games?
Well, so when you speak of white boxing, do you mean in terms of 3D spaces in which we'll move?
The VPN cut out a tiny bit, but yeah, 3D spaces in which you, just kind of roughly plan just the geometry of some of the game levels.
Right. We don't generally start that until we have a technology in place and a bit of a development plan, and obviously level designers, the set designers that work alongside them. So, you're talking about something that happens once there's a full-blown, or not a full-blown, but at least the initial starting pieces of the development team, the game development team. Right now, the team is the 6 artists that we have on staff that are powered by the people that are supporting us on Patreon. So quick shout out to all of our patrons for making it possible for us to pay those artists. And then we have us, you and me and Martin, and we can sit here and work towards the goal that we have right now. That is to create a design Bible for Alice Asylum. That is the written description of the locations, the characters, the story, the design mechanics. And so the ultimate goal of what we're doing right now is design Bible. Right. The white boxing can begin once we have a team in place. When will we have a team in place? I've said in some recent updates, we are making solid progress in our conversations with EA. I wish I could say more about that, but all I can say is like there was progress as of this morning. These are now daily and weekly little milestones that we're passing towards our goal there. And on the publishing, developing funding side, we are also we received communication from multiple of the people who are interested in funding, developing, and publishing the new game in the last 48 hours. And again, I can't put any more detail to it than that, but in short, for all of the parties who we're working with to get development started, there is solid progress happening on a daily and weekly basis right now. And as soon as I'm able to talk about that, I will. But I suspect my guess is this: it's now, the end of June 2019. We will certainly have major pieces of information and news on this stuff to share before the end of the year. So within the next couple of months here, we should be able to share some very big pieces of news about this stuff. So hope that helps.
Yeah, I just was wondering, just out of pure curiosity.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that comes up quite often. And I do wish, this is one of those things we might want to have YouTube videos out there that sort of answers this. So yeah.
Well, you did do a good YouTube clip of, your what's going on kind of that you posted a couple days ago.
Right. Yeah, that had me look up the definition of surprise mechanics. I hadn't heard of that until I posted that video.
I wanted to ask if you did see that the Parliament grilling that company for, I think it was like 3 hours.
I watched it, and it's it's a crazy thing. I mean, the fact that they refuse to call a pig in these cases is, but again, it's not surprising because this is something that, as a company, is making them $1 billion a year.
Mhm.
So you wouldn't give that up easily if you didn't have to, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I think it's great too, and I already mentioned this, and we had a brouhaha on YouTube, but it came to a great conclusion, and I just think it's great that you're doing a good job. Both of you are, Martin, you, and probably everyone else who helps you. You're doing a great job in fielding. Probably, I mean, let's be real, everyone in chat. Everyone originally thought, oh no, EA has their mitts in this. That might cause some pollution in this beautiful, awesome thing that is American McGee's House. But I think that video that was just linked and addressing it, probably more than you guys ever wished to have to. But that's because it's kind of a boy cried wolf thing with EA and their consumers. So it's really cool that you're willing to kind of beat a dead horse to continually remind us that, like, yeah, they're not gonna sully your efforts in this game.
One of the concerns I have in talking too loudly on that topic is that it's very difficult to answer the questions the way the fans would like them answered without potentially offending those parties with whom we need to negotiate to get our deal done, right? So, in other words, there's ways that I could come out and state this, which might make the fans cheer and applaud. Hey, yeah, you're our guys. That could blow up the deal, and so it needs to be handled very diplomatically. And I think a lot of times, obviously, subtlety, nuance, diplomacy, these are not things the internet is famous for being very good at. And so this actually does create a bit of frustration for me because I'm stuck in the middle between the pitchforks and the torches on the one side, get them, burn their castle down. And then meanwhile, I have to go into that castle and kindly, gently work to try to get something done that we all want. So it's a difficult kind of place to try to straddle between the two sides.
At the same time, though, it's really good timing because I think the general public will now see anything that's kind of unsavory from EA's side, but then maybe everything will the dust will settle and people will come back to be able to, maybe there will be good changes made, and people will be able to bounce back and respect the better elements of EA, and then there you go.
Yeah, it's interesting to me just watching any company that receives that degree of backlash, who then continue to go on. I think that their view internally is going to be one that it's a vocal minority that they're up against, and that the reality of the bottom line of the number of consumers who do engage with these much derided systems is the only proof that they need that they're on the right path. And so, there's also a bit of their hands being, they engage with a kind of business that does in fact generate $1 billion a year in profits or revenue. Their shareholders would be more than a little bit upset if they came out and said, "Hey, on principle, we're going to abandon this line of work." It's sort of like that scene in Iron Man where Tony goes and has an epiphany and comes back and says, "We're not selling weapons anymore," and that didn't go very well for him with regards to certain relationships and realities, right? So we we have to keep in mind that sometimes the people we view as bad actors or that they're sort of doing things we don't understand. Hey, why can't you see how bad this is? There's times where their hands are tied. There's realities of the way that the world is constructed around them that make it very impossible for them to see or to act in ways that we think they should be acting. So all right, any other questions, any other thoughts? Anybody else want to share anything?
Okay,
I think that brings us.
I'm just going to
Micro
post the
thought.
link to the shirt in the chat.
I have one last micro thought, and it's just that I've been noticing a lot of kind of game or fiction industry related transgender issues that have been coming up. Like there was a little bit of outcry against Cyberpunk 2077 for, and we won't get into it, but they were having an issue with how transgendered persons were depicted in the game, but then. And then also, I think just today I saw a Twitter post about something about J.K. Rowling was just kind of revealed herself to be kind of a TERF, I think is the term. In other words, and this isn't anything I would expect anything to be answered right now, but I think it would be super cool if Alice Madness, sorry, I'm getting lost in words, if the Asylum game had some type of kind of character based on that identity. I think that would be cool. That's all I'm going to leave it at, because it doesn't mean it needs to happen, and it doesn't mean that you're against those sorts of rights if you were to not do that. I don't want to plant any of those seeds, but I just think it would be cool to just add that to the mix of consideration as we continue to think about characters and how they end up in the game eventually.
I mean, that's obviously a third rail when it comes to game industry politics. And with the Alice series, we are already lifting some pretty heavy weights with regards to psychological health, with the issue of child sexual abuse, and a number of other topics. One of the things about the time frame and the setting in which this takes place, we've said multiple times, is that Alice doesn't imagine anything in one she wasn't exposed to in the world of her day-to-day life. So I feel like if we're going to stay true to that notion, the only way we might see a character or a circumstance that addresses the transgender issue would be trying to figure out a way to insert that into her knowledge as a little girl, as a 13-year-old girl in London. So if somebody wants to come up with the historical basis for that notion, I'm certainly happy to hear it. But I would like us to try to stay, sort of relatively historical, and also stay true to the idea that Alice doesn't manifest things in Wonderland that she hasn't had exposure to in the real world. So we see where that goes.
So no being woke for woke reasons.
I think there's certainly places, for people to and reasons to be woke. I just don't know that the Alice stories have the hooks available to make that make sense. So maybe we leave it at there, and yeah.
Good point. Exactly. That's
All
what I
right.
wanted to bring up.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to add before the end of today's session? All right. Well, this was Crowd design session number 13. Again, we host these over on our Discord server. You can gain Discord access by becoming a patron. Our Patreon links, all the links to the content we've been discussing today can be found in the description below. A big thank you to our insane children for joining in and sharing their ideas today, and also a big shout out to Asteria Visual. He's the one responsible for recording and editing these videos for upload. So that effort is very, very much appreciated.
Always a
These
pleasure.
are weekly, yeah. These are weekly events. So if you would like to join us, if you like what you're hearing here, do consider joining us over on Patreon and getting access to our Discord server so you can join us. If you're watching this on YouTube, I hope you've not been live commenting as this has been going along, because this was a recording on YouTube. So that's it for today. We will see everybody again next week. Farewell.
See you later.
Bye-bye,
Ciao.
everyone.
Make sure to like, favorite, subscribe, do the thing.
Jib it up.
There you go. Jib it up.
Jib it up.
Bye-bye.